7 men came through the front doors, but Claire Bennett was watching the 8th man already inside. At 2:17 in the morning, Mercy Harbor Medical Center was running on fluorescent light, stale coffee, and the last thin thread of patients left in its exhausted night staff. Rain pressed against the emergency room windows in silver sheets. Monitors chimed behind curtains. Wheels rattled over polished tile. Somewhere near the ambulance entrance, a child was crying while a nurse tried to calm him. Then the automatic doors opened, and 7 masked men entered with the confidence of people who had rehearsed every step. One raised his voice and ordered everyone to stay where they were. Another demanded Ethan Cole. Patients froze. Staff members lowered themselves behind desks. Dr. Mason Grant stared toward Trauma 2, where Ethan had been admitted under a false name less than an hour earlier. Claire did not look at the men for more than 2 seconds. She counted them. She noted their spacing, their lines of sight, and the way they had positioned themselves around the exits. Then she looked through the narrow glass panel beside Trauma 2. A man in navy blue scrubs stood beside Ethan's bed, one hand resting near the medication line. Claire had never seen him before. His badge said Adam Pike, respiratory therapy, but he was standing on the wrong side of the ventilator. His gloves were already on. His eyes were not on the monitor. They were on the hallway. 7 men had entered through the doors. The 8th had been waiting beside the patient. Claire's pulse slowed. The noise of the emergency room seemed to stretch into separate pieces. Rain against glass, the steady monitor behind the trauma room wall, the frightened breathing of the people around her, and the soft click of a door beginning to close. Dr. Grant crouched behind the nurse's station and whispered her name sharply. "Bennett, get down." Claire remained standing. She looked ordinary in pale blue scrubs, her blonde hair pulled into a simple knot, an ID badge clipped neatly above her pocket. To everyone at Mercy Harbor, she was the quiet trauma nurse who worked extra shifts, avoided attention, and never spoke. Unless she had something useful to say. No one knew why she always chose a workstation with a clear view of both exits. No one knew why sudden alarms never startled her. No one knew why she studied strangers' hands before their faces. Most of all, no one knew that years earlier, in a place absent from every civilian record, Claire Bennett had learned how to keep people alive while entire rooms turned against her. One of the masked men pointed toward Trauma 2. "Bring us Cole, and nobody has a problem." Dr. Grant looked at Claire as though surrendering the patient might be the safest answer. Claire ignored him. Behind the glass, Adam Pike reached toward Ethan's foreline. Ethan's eyes opened. He saw the unfamiliar man beside him, then looked past him into the hallway. His gaze found Claire. For half a second, confusion crossed his face. Then recognition replaced it. Claire lifted one finger to her lips. Ethan went still. The man beside him never noticed. Claire turned toward the charge nurse and spoke so quietly that only the people nearest her could hear. "Lock Trauma 2. Dr. Grant stared at her. "Who do you think you are?" Claire kept her eyes on the 8th man. The only person who knows what they're really here for. 3 hours earlier, Mercy Harbor Medical Center had been fighting a quieter kind of battle. The storm had pushed 2 highway collisions, a flooded apartment evacuation, and half a dozen urgent cases through the emergency entrance before midnight. Fluorescent lights washed every face in the same exhausted color. The air carried disinfectant, damp coats, and coffee that had been sitting on a warmer far too long. Claire Bennett moved through it without wasting a step. She replaced an oxygen tank before anyone noticed the gauge falling, found an open bed for an elderly patient, and corrected a medication label without embarrassing the new nurse who had written it. No one thanked her. Claire preferred it that way. Dr. Mason Grant stood near the central desk, issuing instructions with the strained confidence of a man determined to appear in control. He handed Claire the least desirable assignments and called it efficiency. "Bennett, take the ambulance arrival in Trauma 2, he said, "and try not to reorganize the entire department while you are at it." Claire picked up the chart. "What are they bringing?" "Male, late 30s. Found near the shipyard after an apparent accident. Low blood pressure, possible internal injury, no identification." Claire looked toward the ambulance entrance. "An accident in this weather?" Grant barely glanced at her. "That is what the report says." The doors opened less than a minute later. 2 paramedics rolled in, a broad-shouldered man with rainwater darkening his brown hair. His name, according to the temporary chart, was Ethan Cole. He was conscious, but only barely, and he watched the room with an awareness that did not match his condition. His eyes moved from the ceiling cameras to the exits, then to every person who approached the stretcher. Claire noticed. She also noticed the paramedics avoided answering simple questions about where they had found him. One of them wore city-issued clothing, but his boots were clean despite the muddy shipyard. The other kept touching the inside of his jacket as if checking for something hidden there. Claire said nothing. She helped transfer Ethan to the trauma bed, checked his breathing, and cut away the wet outer layer of his clothing without exposing more than necessary. A small metal tag slipped from an inside pocket and struck the floor. It had been scorched along one edge. Most of the markings were unreadable, but the center still showed a faint trident. Claire's hand stopped for less than a second. Then she covered the tag with her palm and placed it beside the chart. Ethan's eyes opened wider. "You know what that is," he murmured. "It is damaged property," Claire said. "That is not what I asked." She adjusted the monitor lead near his shoulder. Beneath the edge of his hospital gown, she saw a faded mark that belonged to a unit few civilians could identify. Ethan followed her gaze. "Have we met?" Claire checked the fluid line. "No." The monitor immediately registered a faster heartbeat. Ethan gave the smallest hint of a smile. "You are a poor liar. You are in no condition to judge." Dr. Grant entered, read the chart, and dismissed the inconsistencies as confusion caused by stress. He ordered standard observation and walked away before Claire could explain why the story did not fit. She looked once more at the scorched trident, the guarded men near the entrance, and Ethan's steady attention on every doorway. Something had followed him to Mercy Harbor. Claire could feel it long before the first security camera began repeating the same 7 seconds of empty hallway. The repeating hallway footage lasted exactly 7 seconds. Claire watched an orderly push an empty cart past the pharmacy door, disappear beyond the camera frame, and then appear again in precisely the same position. Same step, same turn of the head, same flicker from the overhead light. She checked the clock above the nurse's station. 12:29 in the morning. The security display showed 12:26. Someone was not merely watching Mercy Harbor. Someone had taken control of what the hospital could see. Claire lowered the brightness on the monitor before anyone nearby noticed. Across the emergency department, Ethan Cole lay still in trauma too, but his eyes followed her through the glass. He had recognized the moment she saw the loop. More important, he had recognized how quickly she hid that knowledge. Claire walked to the supply room at an ordinary pace. She counted 4 cameras along the way. 2 were live. 1 was delayed. The 4th had gone dark. The fire door near radiology had been propped open with a folded towel, creating an unmonitored path from the service corridor to the trauma wing. Claire removed the towel, tested the latch, and found a thin strip of clear tape preventing the lock from catching. "That is not hospital maintenance," Ethan said when she returned. His voice was stronger now, although strain still tightened the edges of each word. Claire checked his blood pressure instead of answering. "You should rest. You checked the cameras, the service door, and the ceiling reflection outside my room. The lighting is irritating. You also moved the metal tray 6 inches so you could see the hallway behind you." Claire looked at the tray. She had done it without thinking. Ethan noticed. Her silence. "You were trained. Most nurses are. Not for what you were expecting." Claire adjusted the blanket across him and kept her expression neutral. Up close, Ethan could see the pale lines circling her left wrist, almost hidden beneath her watch. His attention settled there for 1 second too long. Claire pulled her sleeve lower. "You know that scar," she said. "I know how people get it. Then you know why not to ask." Ethan looked toward the scorched metal tag beside his chart. "I thought Harbor was dead." Claire's hand stopped on the monitor cable, only for a heartbeat. Then it continued. "You have the wrong person. I heard that name once in Coronado. An instructor who could stabilize a casualty, read a room, and disappear before anyone learned her real name." Claire met his eyes. The calm mask remained, but something colder moved behind it. "You heard a story. I heard a warning." Before either could say more, Dr. Grant entered carrying a tablet. He glanced between them with open irritation. "Why is this patient still awake?" "Because he has questions," Claire said. "Then give him fewer reasons to ask them." Grant checked the screen and frowned at Ethan. "We cannot confirm your identity, your insurance, or the details of your accident. Until someone gives me a straight answer, you remain under standard observation." "Move him," Claire said. Grant looked up slowly. "Excuse me." Move him away from the service corridor and place security at both entrances. Based on what? Claire looked toward the hallway monitor, where the same orderly pushed the same empty cart for the 5th time. Based on someone wanting this room to look empty. Grant followed her gaze, but the display switched to a live image before he understood. The cart was gone. The corridor appeared normal. Grant gave Claire a tired, condescending smile. You are seeing threats because you cannot handle a trauma shift. Claire did not argue. She looked past him toward the personnel board. A new name had appeared beneath respiratory therapy. Adam Pike. No photograph. No employee number. No scheduled start time. Then, somewhere beyond the locked fire door, a key turned from the other side. The key turned once, paused, and turned again. Claire watched the fire door without moving. Whoever stood on the other side knew the first turn had failed. That meant the tape had been discovered, and the person beyond the door understood the locking system well enough to try another method. Dr. Mason Grant heard it too, but pride reached his face before concern did. Maintenance, he said. Claire looked at the personnel board, then at the dark camera above radiology. There is no maintenance call scheduled tonight. Grant lowered his tablet. You have checked doors, cameras, carts, and employee names for the last 20 minutes. This is an emergency department, Bennett. Strange things happen. Not in sequence. You are tired. Call security. Grant let out a slow breath, making sure the nearby nurses could hear his patients. And tell them what? That one of my nurses dislikes a name on a board. Claire pointed toward the service corridor. Tell them the camera feed has been replaced, a fire door was altered, and an unidentified employee has access to Trauma 2. The last words finally drew his attention. He glanced through the glass at Ethan Cole, who remained still beneath the white hospital blanket. That patient came in after an accident. He is not a senator. No, Claire said. He is someone who arrived without identification, under a false account, carrying a damaged military tag, while 2 men lied about where they found him. Grant stared at her. You opened his belongings? They fell from his clothing during intake. Then document them and return to your duties. My duty is keeping him alive. Your duty is following the attending physician. Claire did not blink. The emergency room continued around them, unaware of how small the distance had become between ordinary exhaustion and something far more deliberate. A nurse guided an elderly woman toward an examination room. A clerk answered a ringing telephone. Rainwater traced crooked lines down the windows. Behind every familiar sound, Claire heard the absence of others. No security radio near the entrance. No footsteps from radiology. No elevator bell from the service level. Someone was clearing a path. She turned to the charge nurse, Denise Walker. Move the pediatric patients to the interior hall. Say there is a ceiling leak. Denise studied her face. Unlike Grant, she did not ask whether Claire was certain. How many rooms? All of them. Grant stepped between them. Nobody is moving patients without my approval. Claire met his eyes. Then approve it. For 1/10 second, the authority he carried by title confronted the certainty she carried without one. Grant looked away first, but only to preserve his pride. Fine. Interior hall. Quietly. Then this ends. Claire nodded once. She checked the supply cart near Trauma 2. 2 medication seals were broken. Nothing appeared missing, which meant whoever opened it had not wanted medicine. They had wanted access, a hiding place, or both. Ethan watched her from the bed. You feel it now, he said softly. The room changing. Claire adjusted his monitor. Save your strength. You told him to move the children before you protected yourself. They have fewer choices. Ethan studied her with the expression of a man fitting an old memory to a new face. That was in the stories too. Claire leaned closer. Stop saying things you cannot take back. Before he could answer, every monitor in the trauma wing flickered. The lights dimmed, returned, then vanished completely. Emergency lighting painted the hall in muted red. Someone near the waiting room gasped. A child began to cry. The automatic entrance doors released with a mechanical click. Claire looked at Grant. 3 minutes ago, you wanted proof. From beyond the darkened lobby came the measured sound of several people entering together. Claire turned toward Trauma 2 and saw a man in navy blue scrubs standing beside Ethan's medication line. His badge read Adam Pike. His hand was already moving. Claire's voice became quiet and absolute. Lock this room. Now. The emergency lights turned the lobby into a tunnel of red shadows. 7 masked men moved through the entrance in a tight formation, calm enough to make the panic around them feel even louder. One carried a portable radio. Another sealed the front doors. A third stepped toward the center of the waiting room and raised his voice. "We are here for Ethan Cole. Cooperate, and everyone goes home." Patients lowered their heads. Nurses backed toward the interior hallway. Dr. Mason Grant stood frozen beside the central desk, trying to understand how the ordinary rules of his department had vanished in less than 10 seconds. Claire Bennett understood something else. The men wanted everyone looking at them. Through the glass of trauma, too, Adam Pike was already beside Ethan's bed. His hand hovered over the medication line. Claire reached for the room control panel and pressed the lock command. Nothing happened. The screen flashed access override. Someone had disabled the electronic lock before the power failure. "Denise," Claire said quietly, "take the patients through imaging." Charge nurse Denise Walker did not hesitate. She began moving people toward the interior corridor, using the ceiling leak story Claire had given her minutes earlier. The masked leader noticed the movement. "Nobody leaves." Claire stepped into his line of sight before he could focus on Denise. "There are children in that hall. Then keep them quiet." His voice was flat, controlled, and practiced. "Bring us Cole." Grant found enough courage to speak. "He is under medical care. You cannot remove him." The leader looked at Grant's badge. "Doctor, this does not need to become difficult." Grant glanced toward Ethan's room. Fear began turning into calculation. One patient against dozens. One surrender against a department full of civilians. Claire saw the answer forming before he said it. "If we cooperate," Grant asked, "you will leave everyone else alone?" "That is the agreement." Claire looked at the men near the doors. They had positioned themselves to control movement, but none of them had approached Trauma 2. None had asked whether Ethan was conscious. None had demanded his chart, his room number, or confirmation of his identity. They already knew exactly where he was. The group in the lobby was not searching for Ethan. They were holding the hospital still while someone else finished the job. "Do not open that room," Claire said. Grant turned toward her. "This is not your decision. They are not here to take him." The masked leader's head shifted slightly. Claire continued before he could interrupt. "If they wanted Ethan, they would have brought a transport chair, medical support, or restraints. They brought none of it." Grant looked at the men, then back at Claire. "You cannot know that. They are waiting for a signal." Inside Trauma 2, Adam Pike reached into his scrub pocket and removed a small, clear vial. Ethan opened his eyes. He watched the vial, then looked toward Claire through the narrow window. Claire could not reach the electronic lock, but the hospital still had mechanical systems built for fires, contamination, and equipment failure. She moved one step toward the wall panel beside the nurse's station. The leader noticed. "Stay where you are." Claire stopped. Her face remained calm. Her eyes moved to the ceiling speaker, then to the red pull handle beneath it. Grant followed her gaze and whispered, "What are you doing?" "Changing the room." The leader raised the radio to his mouth. Before he could speak, a single tone sounded from Trauma 2. Adam Pike had activated the infusion pump. Ethan's monitor began to change. Claire pulled the emergency isolation handle. Heavy fire doors descended between the lobby and the trauma wing, splitting the 7 men from the patient they believed they controlled. Alarms sounded throughout Mercy Harbor. Ventilation shifted. Magnetic locks engaged across the interior corridors. The masked leader stared at Claire as the barrier lowered between them. For the first time, his confidence disappeared. Claire turned toward Trauma 2. Adam Pike looked up from Ethan's medication line and realized the quiet nurse was now inside the sealed wing with him. Claire started walking. She did not run. "Grant," she said, "call the pharmacy and ask what was removed from that cart." Grant stared after her. "What if he is dangerous?" Claire kept moving toward the room. "He is." Pike reached for the door. Claire's voice carried across the red-lit corridor, low and absolute. "Adam, step away from the patient." He froze because she had used his name. Claire stopped 10 feet from the glass. Behind her, the lobby leader struck the fire door and shouted orders that no longer reached his men on the other side. In front of her, Pike slowly turned. Ethan's monitor continued its steady warning. Claire looked from the clear vial to the man wearing a badge without an employee number. "The people outside were never your rescue team," she said. "They were your distraction." Adam Pike did not step away from the bed. He lowered his hand instead, placing the clear vial beside the infusion pump as if the movement could make it harmless. Claire Bennett stopped at the threshold of trauma 2 and watched everything he tried not to reveal. His breathing stayed even. His shoulders remained loose. His eyes moved once toward the ceiling vent, once toward the supply cabinet, and once toward the emergency release beside the door. He was not trapped. He was calculating. "You changed the system too early," Pike said. "You were supposed to wait for the signal." Claire looked at Ethan Cole's monitor. The numbers were drifting in the wrong direction, slow enough to escape panic, fast enough to become dangerous. "You did not give me one." Pike studied her more carefully. "They said the nurse would be ordinary. They were wrong." Behind the fire doors, the masked men continued shouting demands into the lobby. Their voices reached the trauma wing as muffled echoes beneath the alarms. Claire ignored them. The real danger was 10 feet away, standing beside a patient whose condition was changing by the second. She touched the wall intercom. "Denise, move everyone out of imaging and close the west corridor." Denise answered immediately. "Already moving." "Good. Keep the elevators on manual control." Dr. Grant's voice cut in from the central desk. "Claire, pharmacy says one vial is missing from the emergency cart, but they cannot confirm which one until the backup system loads." Pike gave a small smile. "Then you are out of time." Claire did not look at him. "Mason, bring the sealed medication drawer from the secondary cart. Do not open it." Grant hesitated. "Why?" "Because he expects us to focus on the missing vial." Pike's smile disappeared. Claire continued. "The missing item is bait. The real change came through the infusion line before the lights went out." Ethan opened his eyes halfway. His voice was weak but clear. "She is right." Pike turned toward him. That was the mistake Claire had been waiting for. She crossed the distance, reached past the pump, and closed the line feeding Ethan's arm. No sudden motion. No struggle. Just one precise decision. The monitor steadied enough to give them time. Pike stepped back and placed both hands where she could see them. "You recognize the method," he said. "I recognize patterns." "That is not what I meant." Claire checked Ethan's breathing, then replaced the compromised tubing with a sealed line from the wall kit. Her hands moved with the calm speed of someone repeating a task learned long ago under far worse conditions. Grant arrived with the drawer and stopped when he saw her work. "Who taught you that procedure?" Claire opened the drawer, selected a replacement set, and handed it to Denise as she entered the room. "Someone who hated wasting time." Pike watched Claire as if an old rumor had finally acquired a face. "Harbor," he said quietly. The name changed the air. Grant looked from Pike to Ethan. Denise froze for half a second. Ethan's eyes found Claire again. This time, there was no confusion in them. "I knew it," he said. Claire tightened the new line and checked the monitor. "You knew a story. I knew the people who survived because of it." Pike shifted toward the emergency release. Claire saw the movement in the reflection of the dark monitor before he completed it. "Do not," she said. Her voice was not loud, but he stopped. She turned to Grant. "Lock the medication room. Isolate the oxygen controls, and move every patient behind the west doors." Grant stared at her. "Who put you in charge?" Claire looked through the glass at the shadowed figures trapped beyond the fire barrier. "They did." At that moment, Pike's radio crackled. A voice from the lobby demanded an update. Pike did not answer. Claire reached for the radio, pressed the button, and spoke with absolute calm. "Your inside man has failed. Your patient is alive. Your exits are closing." Silence followed. Then another voice came through, deeper and controlled. "Harbor, we know what he is carrying." Claire looked at Ethan. His face changed. Not fear. Recognition. "The drive," he whispered. "Do not let them take the drive." Claire turned toward the sealed supply cabinet near the back wall. One drawer stood open by less than an inch. The open drawer was almost empty. Claire Bennett crossed the room, keeping Adam Pike within her peripheral vision, and found a sealed package of sterile dressings resting where emergency airway supplies should have been. It weighed too much. Ethan Cole watched her lift it. "That is it," he said. Claire placed the package on the counter without opening it. "What does it contain?" Ethan drew a careful breath. "Names. Locations. Medical cover identities. People who cannot afford to be found." Dr. Mason Grant stared at him. "You brought classified information into my hospital?" "I brought it somewhere I thought was safe." Ethan looked at Claire. "I did not know she was here." The radio in Claire's hand crackled again. "Return the drive, Harbor, and we leave the civilians alone." Claire looked through the glass wall. Beyond the lowered fire barrier, The masked leader had moved his people into two groups. One remained near the lobby. The other was testing side corridors, searching for a way around the sealed doors. They were no longer waiting. They were adapting. Claire pressed the radio button. You already lost the element of surprise. We still have the building. No, Claire said. You have the entrance. She released the button and turned to Denise Walker. Move Ethan to the negative pressure room. Grant frowned. That room has no direct route to surgery. He is not going to surgery. Claire pointed toward the ceiling. The room has an independent air system, a mechanical lock, and a service hatch that opens into the laboratory corridor. Denise understood first. You want them to think he is still here. Claire nodded. She placed a folded blanket beneath the sheet on Ethan's bed, shaped it into the outline of a patient, and kept the monitor connected to a portable simulator from the training cabinet. From the hallway, Trauma 2 still appeared occupied. You planned that quickly, Grant said. I planned it when the lights went out. Pike shifted toward the open doorway. Claire turned her head slightly. Adam, sit in the chair. You cannot watch me and move him. I do not need to. Denise closed the medication room behind him and engaged the manual lock. Pike now stood inside a glass-walled room with no access to the hallway controls. His expression finally changed. He had expected Claire to choose between the patient and the infiltrator. She had removed the choice. Ethan tried to rise, but his strength failed him. Claire steadied him without ceremony. Can you walk 15 feet? If the alternative is staying here. The alternative is being carried, and neither of us wants that. A faint smile crossed his face. Still giving orders. Still wasting time. Denise and Grant moved Ethan onto a transport chair. Claire placed the sealed package beneath a stack of ordinary linens and handed it to Grant. Take this through the laboratory corridor. Do not stop. Do not open it. Do not tell anyone you have it. Grant accepted it, but his confidence broke under the weight of what he now understood. Why trust me? Claire looked toward the lobby, where the masked men were forcing open a secondary passage. Because they dismissed you as frightened. Use it. Grant nodded and disappeared with Denise and Ethan through the service hatch. Claire remained behind. She reset the trauma room lighting, adjusted the false patient beneath the sheet, and returned to the center of the corridor just as the side door alarm began to sound. The masked leader's voice came over the radio. Last chance, Harbor. Claire watched the door indicator turn from green to amber. You keep calling me that, she said. You still do not understand what it means. It means you once belonged to them. No, Claire switched off the corridor lights, leaving Trauma 2 illuminated behind her like a target. It means I decide who gets home. The side door opened. 3 figures entered the empty passage and moved toward the false patient, exactly where Claire wanted them. Behind them, the laboratory corridor sealed, carrying Ethan, Grant, Denise, and the hidden drive beyond their reach. Claire stepped into the shadows as Mercy Harbor's public address system came alive with her voice. All staff, West evacuation is complete. Begins secondary lockdown. Across the hospital, doors closed in sequence. Elevators stopped. Access panels turned red. The intruders had entered believing they controlled one emergency room. Claire had just divided the entire building into rooms they could no longer leave. The first door closed at 2:23 in the morning. The second followed 3 seconds later. Across Mercy Harbor Medical Center, magnetic locks engaged one corridor at a time until the building no longer felt like a hospital under siege. It felt like a machine answering to Claire Bennett. The 3 intruders who had entered the trauma passage reached Trauma 2 and found the illuminated bed exactly where they expected it. One pulled back the sheet. Beneath it was nothing but folded blankets and a training monitor producing a steady rhythm. Claire spoke through the ceiling system before they could react. Wrong room. The corridor lights came on behind them. Every exit indicator had turned red. In the lobby, the remaining men heard the message and began arguing over their radios. Their leader demanded that Claire release the doors. She answered from the central control station. Place everything on the floor and step away from the patients. You do not have authority here, he replied. Claire watched him through a live camera feed that he believed was still disabled. Authority is not your problem. Outside the hospital, blue lights spread across the ring. Federal vehicles stopped beyond the ambulance entrance, followed by 2 dark transport vans with no visible markings. The masked leader saw them through the glass and finally understood that Claire had not been trying to defeat his people. She had been delaying them until the right people arrived. Dr. Grant, Denise Walker, and Ethan Cole reached the negative pressure room through the laboratory corridor. Grant placed the sealed package inside a locked specimen cabinet, then turned toward Ethan. How did she know every route in this building? Ethan rested one hand against the wall, gathering his strength. She does not study rooms the way you do. Then how? She studies what happens when rooms fail. The west entrance opened under a secured override. A team in dark uniforms entered with controlled precision, guiding staff and patients away from the sealed sections. No one shouted. No one rushed. Within minutes, the intruders found every route closed and every civilian beyond their reach. One by one, they followed Claire's instructions and surrendered their equipment. Adam Pike remained locked inside the medication room, staring through the glass as the plan around him collapsed without a single patient being harmed. The fire barrier rose. Commander Jack Sullivan walked into the trauma wing with rain on his shoulders and a silver insignia at his collar. He passed the federal agents, the hospital executives, and Dr. Grant without slowing. His eyes found Claire beside Trauma 2. She was checking the replacement infusion line as if the night had returned to normal. Sullivan stopped 6 feet away. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he straightened and raised his hand in a formal salute. "Harbor," he said, "you still clear a room the same way." Every voice in the corridor disappeared. Grant looked at Claire, then at the commander. Denise lowered the chart in her hands. Even Ethan seemed surprised by the respect carried in Sullivan's voice. Claire did not return the salute immediately. She checked Ethan's monitor, confirmed that his breathing had stabilized, and handed the chart to Denise. Only then did she face Sullivan. "You took too long." A faint smile crossed his face. "You left us a complicated building. I left you 8 people sitting behind locked doors." Sullivan glanced toward the secured corridors. 7 entered from outside. Claire looked at the medication room, where Pike stood under guard. The 8th was already here. Federal agents recovered the hidden drive and confirmed that its seal remained intact. Grant stepped closer, struggling to connect the quiet nurse he had dismissed with the officer now standing at attention before her. "Commander, who is Claire Bennett?" Sullivan looked at him, but his answer was meant. "For the entire emergency department. That depends on which file you are authorized to read." Claire removed her gloves, washed her hands, and returned to Ethan's bedside. She showed no pride and offered no explanation. Around her, powerful people waited for answers. Claire adjusted the blanket over her patient and said only, "His next set of vital signs is due in 4 minutes." 4 minutes later, Ethan Cole's vital signs were stable, the emergency department had been secured, and every person who had entered Mercy Harbor under a false identity was in federal custody. Yet no one in the trauma wing seemed ready to return to normal. Dr. Mason Grant stood beside the nurse's station with his arms lowered and his certainty gone. Denise Walker finished documenting the evacuation, but her eyes kept drifting toward Claire Bennett. Commander Jack Sullivan waited near Trauma 2 while 2 agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation placed the sealed drive inside a protective case. Claire continued working. She checked Ethan's blood pressure, replaced an empty fluid bag, and entered the results into his chart as though the most important thing in the building was still the patient in front of her. Grant finally spoke. "There is nothing in her employment record." Sullivan looked at him. "That is the purpose of a sealed record. It says she attended nursing school in Ohio. It lists 2 community hospitals and no military service. That record is accurate enough for civilian use." Grant glanced at Claire. "Accurate enough?" Sullivan removed a gray folder from a secured case carried by one of the agents. There was no name on the cover, only a faded trident and a red classification stripe. Claire looked at it once, then returned to Ethan's chart. Sullivan placed the folder on the counter and opened it. Most of the first page had been covered by black lines. One phrase remained visible: Trident Combat Medical Program. Denise stepped closer. She completed a Navy program? Sullivan's expression did not change. No. Grant looked almost relieved, as if the answer might return the world to something he understood. Then Sullivan turned the page. She designed the hostage trauma section. Silence settled across the emergency department. The quiet nurse Grant had ordered to stay in her lane had once written the procedures that taught elite teams how to keep civilians alive inside compromised buildings. She had trained medics to read failing systems, control movement, protect patients, and turn ordinary rooms into defensible spaces without creating panic. Ethan watched Grant absorb the truth. She was not assigned to our unit, he said. Our unit was assigned to her. Claire closed the chart. That is enough. Sullivan looked at her carefully. Not tonight. One of the federal agents approached with a small tablet. Commander, the drive is intact. There is one additional file Ethan did not know about. Ethan frowned. What file? The agent placed the tablet on the counter and started a recovered video. The image was grainy, recorded years earlier at a remote airfield. A younger Claire stood beside a transport aircraft wearing a uniform without visible identification. Several operators moved equipment behind her. The final seconds showed a senior officer walking away from the group and boarding an unmarked helicopter. The image froze on his face. Sullivan turned toward Claire. Do you recognize him? For the first time that night, her calm expression changed. Not much, just enough for Ethan to notice. Commander Richard Vale, she said. Grant looked between them. Who is he? Claire kept her eyes on the frozen image. He was my commanding officer. Sullivan closed the gray folder. He was declared dead 6 years ago. The agent enlarged the date embedded in the recovered video. It had been recorded 11 months after Vale's official death. Ethan's voice dropped. Then tonight was not only about the list. Claire understood before anyone else said it. The hospital attack, the false employee, and the search for the drive had all been arranged by someone who knew her old training, her habits, and the systems she would trust. Someone had not merely expected Harbor to be alive. Someone had planned for her to intervene. Sullivan asked the question quietly. Why would Vale want you back? Claire removed her identification badge and looked at the ordinary name printed beneath her photograph. He does not want me back. She placed the badge beside the sealed folder. He wants to know whether I remember what really happened. A monitor chimed from the next room. Claire turned toward it immediately. Grant watched her walk away, still unable to understand how a person could carry that much history and move with such little need to explain it. Before entering the room, Claire looked back at Sullivan. Keep the file closed until Ethan can travel. And after that, Claire opened the door. After that, we find a man who has been dead for 6 years.